𝙎𝙪𝙢𝙢𝙢𝙢. It was our big day. Today we joined the main group to climb up Cradle mountain summit. There were 21 of us, with some members even traveling from overseas for the experience. Once everyone had arrived, we set off. We hopped on the shuttle bus and rode it all the way to its final stop. Here, we took a moment to prepare before beginning our hike. Since we would end up walking at different paces later, we made sure to take a group photo while we were still all together. Now it was time to start our hike. The weather was quite bad that day. It was raining, windy and foggy, but we pressed on excitedly nonetheless. At the fork in the path, we initially turned left, before realizing we were supposed to go right. Without further ado, we turned back and headed in the correct direction. The first section of the trail followed the 𝙎𝙧𝙖𝙙𝙢𝙀 circuit, making for an easy and flat start. In my opinion, it's always best to wear bright colored clothing when bushwalking, so you can be seen from a distance. Leaving the circuit, we proceeded towards Wombat Pool. Checking our location on the map. From here, the path became steeper, with frequent inclines and declines. The rocky trails were wet and full of puddles, so we had to walk cautiously. Some flowers in the area. Along the way, we passed 𝙎𝙢𝙢𝙢𝙢𝙀 northern edge. Pausing for a quick picture before continuing to Wombat Pool. Reminiscing the hike we did 2 days ago, this track was relatively well established with plenty of steps and stairways, then the breathtaking view of 2 lakes at the top of the climb. However, the atmosphere felt entirely different due to the gloomy weather. Upon reaching Wombat Pool, I began to suspect that we wouldn't be able to see much from the summit. However, walking in the rain was quite fun, especially with gumboots and a waterproof, windproof coat. As we ascended, mobile reception and internet connection grew weaker. Eventually, we couldn't even check the map anymore. The rough, uneven path also demanded our full attention. Multitasking was simply draining at this point. I also noticed another group member recording our hike. It was a privilege to have his footage as a keepsake of our journey. Watching his effort inspired me to do my best too, so thank you again. After a long climb, we reached a brief stretch of level ground, only to begin climbing again shortly after. By this point, visibility was extremely poor. The fog was thick, completely obscuring the view beyond the hill. The rocky steps ahead were incredibly steep, and the wind had picked up significantly. We paused briefly to take in the eerie yet mesmerizing sight of fog enveloping the hills. It kept getting thicker, creating an almost mystical landscape. Still, it was the perfect moment for another photo. Back on the path, we moved slowly and carefully. I believe we were looking at Dove Lake and 𝙎𝙧𝙢𝙢𝙢, but without a clear view or map access, I couldn't confirm for certain. Given our estimated location, we were probably near Wombat Peak, where we could see both lakes. Moving on, after a short walk, we encountered yet another set of stairs. Beyond them, we finally reached a relatively flat section of the ground. Had we only been walking for 45 minutes? Were you kidding? The relentless climbs and poor weather made it feel much longer. I suspected we were now near the fork, close to Marions Lookout. We stopped to take a few more pictures before pressing on with our journey. More stairs greeted us as we pressed on. Looking around, we could see just how strong the wind was. The trees swayed violently, their branches bending under the force. This section of the path was made up of pebbled steps, which felt wobbly and slippery in the damp weather. Despite the challenges, our spirits remained high. We weren't about to miss a chance for a photo. As we continued our ascent, the cold wind howled around us, and the fog thickened. I could also feel that the air had become thinner. We must have gained a considerable amount of elevation by now. Looking back, we were treated by a breathtaking view of the landscape below. Unfortunately, the fog was too dense to fully appreciate it. Not much further along, we reached a truly arduous section of the climb. The steps here were obscure and uneven, making each movement a challenge. Our saving grace was a sturdy chain railing running along the side, offering us something to hold on. At this point, our trekking poles became more of a hindrance. We needed both hands free to pull ourselves up the steep, jagged path. This shot perfectly captured the moment we struggled up the rocky incline. The rain began pouring down again. The path beyond the climb was also full of rocks, forcing us to watch our every step. The wet condition made the stones slippery. We could easily sprain an ankle. Soon after completing this climb, we arrived at Marions Lookout. It is roughly the halfway mark to Cradle Mountain. From here, we were meant to enjoy a stunning view of two lakes, Crater Lake and Dove Lake, which should be one on each side. Unfortunately, the thick fog obscured everything, and we could barely see into the distance. We continued on and reached a rehabilitation area. Sections of the landscape here could use some restoration. Not long after passing this point, the rain, which had eased earlier, returned once more. This time it was heavier and more persistent. For me, this section of the walk and the climb to the summit were the most memorable, largely due to the challenging weather conditions. Thankfully, I was wearing a waterproof raincoat, an insulated snow pants, and a pair of warm gumboots that were proved to be the perfect gear for such conditions. It's crucial to be well equipped when hiking in the mountains and to never underestimate the extreme weather in alpine regions. There's no easy way to turn back once you're deep into the trail. That's why checking the weather forecasts and researching the trail are absolute necessities when preparing for a hike. After some time, we reached a long boardwalk, which took us approximately 30 minutes to cross. By this point, my hands were freezing and shaking. Though it was not as harsh as in snowy conditions, the wind really beat. Hiking in a group was truly uplifting. Despite the rough weather, the shared experience and camaraderie made the journey feel more manageable. After a long trek, we arrived at 𝘎𝙧𝙖𝙙𝙢𝙀. This iconic landmark is only used as an emergency shelter, providing a much-needed refuge for hikers in harsh conditions. We took a few pictures to mark this milestone. With only a small window on the lower level, the hut was pretty dark, but it was warm. It made for a great resting spot. This shot captures the interior of the hut well, showcasing its upper and lower levels. After replenishing our energy, we resumed our journey. From this point, it should take 3 hours to the summit. By now, the heavy rain had eased, but the air had grown noticeably colder and thinner. Not far from 𝘎𝙧𝙖𝙙𝙀, there was a public restroom. The pathway to the summit was a continuous rocky ascent. The earlier rain had formed streams flowing down from the top. Shortly after, we reached a fork in the path. Following this boardwalk, we pressed on towards the summit. Soon we came across a signpost, indicating that we still had 2.5 hours to go. The boardwalk was narrow, only wide enough for a single person, but it made the trek easier. However, when it ended, we found ourselves back on a rocky, uneven path. By this time, the fog had thickened so much that we could only see a few meters ahead. It was also at this point that the terrain significantly became more challenging. The signposts ahead directed us to the right. From here, we had to climb many large boulders with little vegetation. The incline grew steeper, forcing us to tilt our bodies slightly to the left as we climbed. With the thick fog, there was no visible scenery around us. The terrain now was so rugged that we needed both hands to grip the rocks and pull ourselves up. The hiking poles were not very useful here. As the path had become a lot more challenging, we secured them in our backpack to free our hands. By now, we were high up on the rocky mountain, but visibility remained poor. For those of us with short legs, climbing over the large boulders got even more difficult. But those with longer legs could pull themselves up more easily. This section of the climb demanded sturdy hiking shoes. The wet rocks were dangerously slippery. Despite the foggy weather, the landscape still looked incredible in photographs. However, the toughest part of the climb was still ahead. At some points of the climb, it was difficult to even find a path forward. Thankfully, some group members guided us in the right direction. One of them pointed out that we just needed to follow the poles marking the path. A helpful tip. Around this time, I decided to store my recording device in my backpack, worried that I might accidentally drop it. After all, one of our group members had already lost her phone somewhere around this hanging rock formation. So from here, I had no more recording until we were back. But thankfully, we had plenty of photos shared by the group. The first group that reached the summit had already taken pictures at the marker there. Unfortunately, there was no scenic view from the top either, just thick fog. Taking memories at the summit. Here are two of our 4 hiking organizers. At that point, we were just 15 to 20 minutes away from the top. We were soon told that there wasn't much to see up there anyway. So we decided to take some group pictures here before heading back down. Here's a great shot of us beginning our descent. We couldn't afford to waste too much time, as we needed to catch the last shuttle bus. Just as we started climbing down, the fog began to lift, revealing the stunning landscape that we missed on the way up. The view was breathtaking. I found climbing down to be much easier, and we descended at a much faster pace. By now, it was around 3 p.m., and the last bus was scheduled for 5:30 p.m., leaving us with just 2.5 hours to make it back. We had to hurry up. Our hiking organizers moved incredibly fast. They climbed up and down effortlessly. One of them even joked that this was a walk in the park, a testament to their experience and fitness. Those long legs certainly come in handy. Now that the fog had cleared, the scenery was absolutely stunning. Stopping to snap a few last photos before rushing towards the entrance. It was hard to believe that just earlier today, we had stood at the top of that mountain. What an incredible and unforgettable day! And just in time for the last bus. 다음 금이 노코테인먼트